an introduction to Ileana. Doesn't everybody been listening to Ileana for the last several months and enjoying her expertise as our visiting living professor from UNCA? So today she's not speaking about how we would understand God in a better way. She's speaking about how we understand our own health and our own bodies. And since we're still here in this world, we might want to know that. So no further ado, Oh.
There is one ado. If there are questions, please wait for the microphone.
Can everyone hear me?
Yes, yes.
Okay, this is comfortable level for everybody? Okay, all right, so one of the things I'm going to need to remember to do is to sit down, because otherwise I'm probably not going to be good for much in the next week or so. So, thank you for being here. I feel so crammed full of information at this point that part of the problem is that I have much too much to get into 1 hour. So,
make it a little louder. Oh, okay.
Okay.
Also, you might have mentioned a handout.
Yes, I'm about to. So Sarah made the excellent suggestion that I make a handout that will be available after, not unfortunately right after, but when I get it made up, because I've been trying to figure out how to put everything that I can possibly cram into this. And that will, I think, be helpful for those of you who feel that this is worth pursuing, which I hope will be quite a few of you. Okay, so the information that I'm going to give you, I should start by saying, has changed me. I have been either completely vegetarian or almost vegetarian for over 40 years. But I was absolutely positive that I would never be completely vegan. And after I had read enough of what I'm about to present to you today, I changed my diet at the end of January, and I hope at some point in a few months to be able to tell you, and here's my blood work, because it should show dramatic changes. Every single lead researcher in the large number of studies that were featured in what I was reading has also changed their diet, and they did a long time ago because the evidence is so incontrovertible. However, I do not expect that anybody here, if they're like me, is going to walk out going, that's it, I will never eat an animal product again. Because it takes a while, I think, for us all to change our behavior. And we are very wedded to the way we eat. Changing our diet is a big deal, and for some of us who rely on other people to prepare our food, it's even more of a big deal. What I do hope is that you're going to pay close attention to what I'm telling you, that you're going to be cheered and encouraged by it, and that you're going to decide to move in the direction that what I'm presenting is going to suggest. So I'd like to begin by telling a story about the man who wrote 3 books that I have at the back of the hall of the chapel on a table. Michael Greger, who wrote How Not to Die, How Not to Diet, and How Not to Age, that will explain to you both why he did that and why that's had such an impact, why that and other books have had such an impact on me. When Dr. Greger was 9 years old, his grandma Greger was 65, and she had had either 3 or 4 coronary bypasses at that point, and she had such bad peripheral artery disease that it hurt so badly to walk that she was in a wheelchair. And her doctors had told her that there was nothing else that they could do for her, and they had, not in so many words, a little more tactfully said, you know, go home, get your affairs in order. Well, maybe not that much more tactfully, and, you know, this is it. And then she watched an episode of 60 Minutes, which I'm sure most of you remember was a news show. And on 60 Minutes was a Nathan Pritikin who had healed himself of coronary artery disease and was now running a residential program that other people could come to. She was in New York State. Pritikin was in California, but she got herself to California. So let me just backtrack a little bit and tell you about Nathan Pritikin. When he was 44, not like Grandma Gregor's 65, his doctor gave him the same advice, that his arteriosclerosis was so bad, and they had done all they could, that basically, apparently he said to the doctor, are you telling me to just sit in a rocking chair and wait to die? And his doctor said, well, yes. He was an engineer, and engineers look for solutions, so he started looking to see if there was any place in the world where people didn't have this much heart disease. And he found out that in rural Africa, there was almost no heart disease at all. So he started wondering what people ate there, and found out that what they did was to eat an almost 100% animal food-free diet. And he decided, well, don't have anything to lose. So that's what he ate. He cured himself of coronary artery disease, and he then went on to found this program. So Grandma Gregor got herself to his program. This was fairly early days. This was in the 1960s. And she was one of his astounding successes. She came in a wheelchair, and 3 weeks later, I still find this hard to believe, she walked out having already done a 10-mile hike. She lived to be 91, and she died presumably of something else. And when she came back, Michael Greger, who was 9 years old, said to himself, that's what I'm going to be. I'm going to be a doctor, and I'm going to cure people. So he went to medical school, and he went all the way through medical school, and he did not hear a word about using diet to reverse heart disease, not a word. Now, at that point, heart disease was, and still is, the #1 killer of people in the United States. And he thought, well, wait a minute. I mean, I know this happened. How did it get lost? So he started thinking, well, I wonder what other research has been done on nutrition and health that has gotten lost that doctors don't know about. So he ended up founding a site, which if you go to websites, I recommend really highly, called nutritionfacts.org. It's a nonprofit site, and we'll go into why in just a moment. He and a large team read every single English language study on nutrition every year. And he has a remarkable gift for putting together a number of studies into what we seem to have found out at this point about a particular topic. The website, I have to say, is the best website I've ever seen. You can watch short videos of Dr. Greger showing you the studies with citations to where they came from at the end. If you're like me and you're a fast reader, you can read them. None of this is his research. This is everybody else's research. He doesn't do any, he just puts it together. So I'll be citing him a lot, and I want you to know that, these are not his ideas. And I used to teach logic and scientific reasoning, and I can tell you that he's good at analyzing studies and pointing out flaws and so on. He's really trustworthy. So if you're inclined that way, you can go to the site, and if not, the 3 books are essentially compilations of findings on particular topics. Okay. So What I'm bringing you today is information about a way to prevent, or if it's too late for that, to reverse most of the diseases that people are actually being disabled by and dying from these days. And as you may guess, the way to do that is through change in diet. Why don't we know about this? Well, there are two reasons. One of the reasons is that some of this information is very recent. There is a lot, for instance, about the bacteria, the microorganisms, because they're more than just bacteria, that live inside us that we didn't know until very recently. We weren't able to culture most of those bacteria, and they couldn't be examined on site. And so we have a whole world of information that we didn't have maybe even as recently as 10 years ago. So that's one reason you don't know about this. But the other reason is the same reason that it took about 50 years to get to the point where everybody understood that smoking really is bad for you. And that is that big tobacco put a huge amount of money into not only deliberately confusing people, but into actually lying about the evidence. And the same thing is happening these days from both big pharmaceutical companies. This is $1 trillion a year business. You make a lot more money if you keep diabetics diabetic, because all the drugs used to treat diabetes cost a lot of money. And from big food. There's a lot of money being made selling people the kind of food that is actively bad for you. The reason that Dr. Greger has kept his Nutrition Facts as a nonprofit site is because money has so contaminated scientific research that a few years ago, the editor of the New England Journal of Medicine, which is generally regarded as the best medical journal in the United States, put out an editorial saying it's really hard to know what to believe about published medical research. I mean, things are not in good shape. So, who can you trust? Well, you can trust studies done by people who don't have a lot to gain by telling you that you shouldn't eat foods that make a lot of money for people. So I think that the evidence is pretty solidly, I'm more confident than that actually, on the side of what I'm going to be telling you. But if you're thinking like I was thinking, wait a minute, why haven't I heard any of this? Those are the main reasons. Okay, so when we look at health and nutrition now, and when we look at health and nutrition when we were growing up, both nutrition and health have changed, and there's a strong connection. So, for one thing, if we look at how many obese people there are in the United States, and if we add to that overweight people who are not over the line into what is considered obesity, the number now, or the percentage now, is that 70% of all Americans are overweight, and of those, more than half are obese, which is the point at which, your doctor starts telling you this is a health problem. Why has that happened? So that's one way in which things have changed a lot. Type 2 diabetes used to be called adult onset diabetes, but it's not called that anymore because children as young as 8 are getting adult onset diabetes, so clearly isn't adult onset, and that's the insulin-resistant form of diabetes. A huge number of Americans are diabetic or pre-diabetic, and if Medicare were willing to reimburse for preventive tests, and doctors did what they should be doing and get what's called a hemoglobin A1C on people, which will tell you the amount of blood sugar that is stuck to your red blood cells over the last 3 months, we would probably be able to pick up even more of it before it got so bad that it actually started bothering people. That wasn't true when we were growing up. Cancer rates are higher than they used to be. When we were young, about 1 in 50 women could expect to develop breast cancer. These days, about 1 in 8 American women can be expected to develop breast cancer. That's changed. A lot of us, there are several of us I know at Brooks-Howell who are successful survivors of breast cancer. So we may be thinking, okay, but actually the means of curing breast cancer have improved a lot. Well, not really. There are very few cancers that are under much, much better control than they used to be. Some childhood cancers, some forms of leukemia, Hodgkin's lymphoma, there have been dramatic improvements. But for all other cancers, recovery rates are pretty well flat and have been flat for the last 30 years. So what we're looking at is a change overall for the worse in in the health of the average American. For the very first time since wartime, overall American life expectancy has gone down very slightly in the last couple of years. Maternal mortality, we are now 44th from the best in the world. We used to be right up there at the top, and we're, down here. What's happening? Well, one of the things that we can say is that if we look at people's health, there has been a change from infectious disease, which 100 years ago was still a very, very significant cause of people's death and disability, to chronic illness. And there's so many chronic illnesses, I actually made myself a little list here. So let me just read you this cheery little list. And this is by no means complete. Diabetes, heart disease, high blood pressure, cancer, a lot of autoimmune diseases which were either rare, almost unheard of when I was young. Parkinson's disease, multiple sclerosis, Alzheimer's dementia, macular degeneration, which I've got myself, autoimmune thyroiditis, ulcerative colitis, non-alcoholic fatty liver disease. It's estimated that 2/3 of all Americans have non-alcoholic fatty liver disease, highly correlated with obesity. Stroke. At that point, I thought, okay, that's enough. I'll stop at this point. Okay, so we have a deterioration in health because what we have now is primarily chronic illness. I can put this back in my pocket, right? Okay, that'll help. Whoops. What did I snag here? Okay. Now, what has happened on the nutrition side? Well, we have moved to the point where for most Americans, only about 11% of their diet comes from non-processed food. I may have the exact number wrong, but for most Americans, the overwhelming proportion of their food is processed in some way or another, or is an animal product of some kind, most of which are processed. So sugar consumption about 100 years ago was about 40 pounds per person per year. At this point, we have finally beat out the British for consuming more sugar than anybody else in the world. They used to be the leaders. The Dutch are right up there too. And we, a few years ago, were at over 140 pounds a year. Meat consumption has gone up a lot. Meat consumption has, meat consumption has probably gone up the least, but it has gone up from somewhere close to 200 pounds a year to well over 200 pounds a year. Dairy consumption, and here I mean primarily milk, has more than tripled. At the beginning of this last century, it was somewhere around 200 pounds a year, and now it is well over 600 pounds a year. Are these two facts correlated? Yes. That's why I'm talking today. Okay. So what we're looking at is basically, if we just keep processed food, just take sugar out of it, because most sugar goes into processed food, and we add meat, eggs, and fish, those have gone way up, and what's gone down is whole grains, fruit, and vegetables, legumes. Might as well give them their capital letter too. Now, why would that make such a difference? Well, it must be that there's something bad about all the stuff we're eating so much more of, and there's something good about the stuff that we're eating so much less of. And at this point, I'm pausing because I'm thinking, there's so much to say, there's so much to say. Part of it, and I think that all of us can think of this quite easily, is that processed food has an awful lot of additives. And all of the food that we eat, of course, increasingly is, unless we're careful, it has pesticide residues, it has genetically modified food, genetically modified organisms in there. It has a lot of stuff that we would not have found in food 100 years ago, and that we wouldn't have found nearly as much of in food even 50 years ago. Certainly 70 years ago, this was not that much of a problem. And it's true that those things are not good for us, and that they are definitely part of the problem. And for some people with some illnesses, Parkinsonism, for instance, does seem to be causally connected to pesticide exposures. Farmers are much more likely to have Parkinsonism as a result of all the herbicides and so on that they're exposed to. But this is, in certain ways, a relatively minor issue. So I don't want to make it go away, but this isn't the big thing. Part of it is that the food itself, the components that make it, the nutrients, some of them aren't very nutritious, in the food are bad in the top list. So let me try to figure out where to start. Okay, let's take cured meat. So this means bacon, ham, sausage, that kind of thing. Relatively recent research has led to the unanimous conclusion by large panels that processed meats are as carcinogenic as tobacco, as smoking cigarettes. So, as somebody I read in my kind of glut of reading the last few months said, if you wouldn't sit down and smoke 2 cigarettes before you ate lunch, then you really shouldn't eat 2 hot dogs for lunch, because the carcinogenic effect is just as bad in the hot dogs. So they have now been listed as class 1 carcinogens, which is right up there with tobacco. Okay, so this is one specific thing. But meat in general, to everybody's surprise, is a risk factor for the kinds of illness that I'm talking about. How do we know that? Well, we know that partly from large epidemiological studies, that is, studies where you take a large population and you look at individual factors. In these kinds of studies, we're looking, what do they eat, usually over a long period. One of the most famous, because it was very well conducted, was published under the name of the China study. The Chinese government became very interested in why cancer rates varied so widely across China. And they collaborated, Chinese researchers collaborated with a researcher from Cornell, Colin Campbell, and a researcher from Oxford to study 6,500 Chinese in 130 villages across China. And what they found, which was a bit of a shocker, is that meat intake correlated with development of cancer all the way down to 0 meat intake. That is, even if you ate only a little bit of meat, you still got more cancer than if you didn't eat any meat. And as I say, that was a real surprise. I remember reading the China study when it first came out as a book and thinking, really? You mean any amount of meat? Turns out, yes, that does mean any amount of meat. Now, the man who was the American lead researcher, Colin Campbell, was the son of a dairy farmer and grew up eating meat 3 times a day, drinking milk at every meal, and certainly when he was young, he was not prepared to find this out. As he became more interested in nutritional research, he's one of the first people who did end up going, well, the evidence is clear, and changing his diet. So why would that be? Well, one thing that all of the animal products have in common is that they fuel growth. Now, when you are young and you need to grow, animal protein intake, particularly milk, cow's milk contains a lot of bovine growth hormone. And it needs to, and it also contains a lot of protein, because a cow grows from whatever it weighs when it's born to weighing about 1,200 pounds at the end of a year. And milk in, a cow that's been allowed to nurse for that long is the way it gains that weight over a year. So it needs to grow. But there's a difference between what young animals need and what old animals, like pretty well everybody in this room, needs. We do not need to grow. And this is where the teacher in me wants to go. So class, tell me, What kind of growth happens in older people that we really don't want to have happen?
Cancer.
Exactly. So it turns out that that part of the issue is that if you're looking at a population of people who don't get very much to eat very often, that population can probably use that protein, especially if they're young and they're likely to die when they're in their 40s, which people were doing until not too long ago. But if you're planning to live to be 80 or 90 or 100 or a little more, as some of us have already done, the things that were good for you when you're younger are not good for you when you're older, in fact, quite the reverse. The other thing is, it turns out that if you look at people's intestinal tracts and you ask, what kind of diet would an animal with this kind of intestinal tract be meant to eat? The answer is almost entirely plants. If we look at cats, cats are what are called obligate carnivores. If you want to feed your cat a vegetarian diet, both you and the cat are in for a very hard time. Cats have very short intestinal tracts. They have highly acid stomachs, a lot of hydrochloric acid to dissolve the meat. And the reason their intestinal tract is so short is they want to get the leftover stuff out before it starts putrefying, which produces poisonous compounds which are very bad for you. So they've got very sharp teeth. They don't chew, they basically tear their meat, gulp it down, it goes through quickly and out the other end. When we feed them stuff like Science Diet, I am sad to say, because I once had 3 cats, they get things like diabetes. And I remember when my cats got diabetes, I thought, what? A diabetic cat? Well, I don't want to gross you out, so I will not go into what I found out about what's in pet food. But believe me, they were not meant to eat that kind of diet, and they respond by getting diseases that they shouldn't be getting. But when you look at us, we've got teeth that are meant for grinding. Even our so-called canine teeth aren't very sharp and aren't very good at tearing. We have very long intestinal tracts, so clearly the food is meant to stick around for a while and get really thoroughly processed. We don't seem to be meant to eat a mostly or large or partly, large part animal food diet, and we get diseases as a result. Now, 2 clues that this is true are, first of all, the way we handle animal fat versus animal iron versus plant iron. Getting too much iron from animal sources, which we get basically from meat, because it's all from hemoglobin. That's where you get, it's, for short, it's called heme iron if you're reading articles like I've been reading. Heme iron cannot be excreted from basically, if you've eaten it, it gets into your body. And excessive iron in sufficiently large amounts will kill you. Every year there are a few kids who do die from getting into their chewy vitamins with iron and eating a whole bunch. There's nothing you can do. You cannot get it out of the body. It won't chelate, and it's very, very dangerous. And if you have a very rare disease called hemochromatosis where you accumulate iron, you better donate blood because you need to get it out of your body. Now, at the same time, I didn't grow up, but I learned about this because I was married to a doctor. And at the same time, I've also read, because I've always been interested in nutrition, that yes, plants have iron, but we don't seem to assimilate it easily. Well, here's the thing. It turns out that our bodies can control how much iron we take in from plant sources. So if the plants are giving us more iron than we need, we can just get rid of it. But we can't do that with animal sources. So again, it looks like we really weren't meant to be eating meat. Now, let me remember what was the thing I was going to say about milk, which is also equally indicative of we probably shouldn't be eating this. It will probably come back to me. But the evidence suggests, both from this kind of very fine-grained, detailed evidence that we've only learned about recently, and also from studying where the healthiest, long-lived people live and what they eat, and from looking at what our closest primate relatives eat, that we are meant to live on a diet that is almost entirely derived from vegetation. I can't say that I was thrilled to find this out. I don't have much taste for meat, but I do love cheese. And the idea that, what, you mean I'd be better off not eating any of it, really took me quite a while to sink in. So let me pause for a moment, let you mull over this, check my time, because my vision's too poor to see what the time is otherwise.
3:42. 3:40.
Thank you. Okay. So let me stop here for any questions that anybody has, and thank you for listening so patiently. I know I've talked a lot. Yes?
When I hear a lecture like this, I sometimes, if I was a cynical, say, I shouldn't eat anything. I should stop eating.
No,
well, let me finish, please.
Sorry.
So, like, if say fish, oh, there's mercury in it, so don't eat fish. So I got off meat, and now I have to get off fish. And then plants. Well, that sounds, as you said, well, that's got pesticides. But that's silly and exaggerated. But that's the feeling one of your students, this one gets. But
yes.
So the two that I think, things I do would like to say, one is, Matt has said it like, you'll hear a certain theory, like something is good for you or bad for you. 5 years later, there'll be another study and say, no, don't drink milk anymore, or eggs. Eggs is a good example. Eggs used to be a no-no. Now, eggs are good, according to some. So, and then a last one I'll have is, one thing I hope you mentioned somewhere along the line, I think a big component of health is exercise and movement. And so I think if you're a sedentary person, you don't do anything, you could eat right, but you're still, I think, you could be in for trouble.
Yes, and I think the controversy, particularly over cholesterol and fat, was one that I really spent a lot of time trying to look for more information on. Because at one point, I was eating a diet that had a fair bit of coconut oil in it, and it was doing just exactly what I had read it was going to do. As long as I didn't add in any sweeteners, I was in fact full. I did not get hungry. I, did not get shaky from, weird things happening in my blood sugar, and my weight was stable. And then I started reading all this research that said, no, saturated fat is bad for you. And I thought, wait a minute, there's all this stuff about, no, it's not saturated fat. It's got nothing to do with this. Who do I believe? Well, at this point, we seem to have a consensus from all the large-scale epidemiological studies, and from looking at where people live the longest, and from several other places, that finally convinced me that, yes, it is true that for a very small subpopulation, and that is people who have intractable epilepsy, a high-fat diet can be a salvation. But for almost everyone else, although and even for those people, unfortunately, the short-term results are good. The long-term results show high cancer rates and all kinds of stuff. So I would say it took me about a year of looking at this stuff to go, okay, I understand why I was misled in that direction. I'll be glad to give you more information later, but I, kind of want to get on with it. Okay, so I think I've done a fair bit on why this stuff, which has increased, is bad for you. What about this stuff? Why is this stuff good for you? Well, there are two groups of reasons. One is that plants contain a huge number of chemicals, quite literally thousands of them, that animals need to stay healthy. And when we don't consume them, but we consume, say a cow eats the grass. The grass has all kinds of really good stuff in it, including very high quality protein. That's where the cow gets it from. Including calcium, that's where the cow gets it from. That's how it gets into the milk. But the thousands of chemicals that the plants that the cow eats produces get used by the cow, keep the cow healthy. When we drink the milk or eat the meat, we don't get those chemicals. The cow has used them. So most of the healing properties that nutritional scientists have been finding out about, the chemicals that will heal your macular degeneration if you're lucky and you start soon enough, the chemicals that will calm inflammation, the chemicals that make it very much less likely that you'll get certain kinds of cancers, are contained in plants, and if we don't eat the plants, we don't get those chemicals. So there are chemicals in classes called flavonoids and polyphenols, and the reason people keep being told, eat the rainbow, is because most of those chemicals are brightly colored. So when you're told dark green leafy vegetables, orange or red bell peppers, berries, which are dark blue or purple, all of those colors are really important and healing chemicals. And they help you, but only if you eat them. So that's one big reason that we need to be eating plants. The other big reason, which is the one about which the most recent research is being done, is that we have known for a long time that, if you only eat animal and processed foods, you're probably going to be constipated. We did understand that that's not a good thing and that may give you larger health problems. But what we didn't understand until very recently is that the microorganisms in our gut, first of all, outnumber us. We have 2 to 3 trillion cells in our bodies. But we have many times more than 2 to 3 trillion microorganisms living inside us. Now, for that, I'm going to do some more writing. Those were the microorganisms that we couldn't culture. They don't live, they live there, that's their home, and they don't do well if you take them outside their home. So on the one hand, but then about 10 or 15 years ago, some new methods of culturing them were developed, some new tools were developed, and all of a sudden there's just this explosion in learning. And it turns out that UNC Chapel Hill is one of the centers in the country for this research. Okay, so on the one hand, every single human being has a microbiome, which is the name for all those teeny little things that live inside us, that is completely individual as our fingerprints. But on the other hand, all of those thousands of individual species can be divided into 2 groups. One group is called Bacteroides, and it encompasses many more than just this particular one, but that's what they've decided to call it. And the other is dominated by another organism called Prevotella. So I had a lot of trouble telling these apart until I noticed that BA starts bad and Prevotella starts prevent. Okay, so they eat what we eat, quite literally. And not only that, but some of them are able to influence what we eat, particularly these bad guys, because they really like sugar. And they can actually, to some degree, account for why people think, oh, I just got to have something sweet. It isn't you, it's your little bugs. They would like you to feed them. And they determine a huge number of things. For instance, if you have a primarily Prevotella microbiome, you are much more likely to survive COVID-19 than if you don't. These guys will edge out these guys. These guys will, well, for one thing, because this is one of the dozens of things I've read, but this one I actually remembered in detail. Some of these guys make a chemical, I've forgotten what the initials stand for, it is a highly cancer-causing chemical, I mean really bad. And they make it when you eat meat. But if you take vegans who have a Prevotella prevalent microbiome and you feed them a steak, I guess some vegans actually volunteered for this research, their gut doesn't make any TMAO because they don't have the bugs that make it. Now, if they keep eating steak, give them a few days. These are short-term changes. You don't have to wait around a long time before this happens. This is pretty well day-to-day. They're going to start getting Bacteroides, which are going to start making TMAO, which will do all the bad stuff. But if you keep feeding the good guys, what do the good guys want? They want this stuff. They eat fiber. They eat the fiber that we can't eat. They make our vitamin K. They make quite a bit of our B vitamins. They help to recycle some of the protein. We're pretty good at recycling our own proteins so that we don't need to keep eating more and more. And they help in that process. And they edge out the bad guys. On the other hand, the bad guys are perfectly happy to start fighting back if you eat what they eat. So the other big reason why eating a non-animal product, non-processed food diet is important is because the more we know about it, the more we understand that our microbiome has an enormous amount to do with our health. I mean, really way, way more than we had any understanding of. So the reason that we need to eat less of this stuff and more of this stuff is twofold. This stuff is actually actively bad for us, both in the simple things it contains, like cholesterol, and in the fact that it nourishes some seriously bad guys that make chemicals that promote all kinds of illnesses. And this stuff is actively good in the same two ways. It gives us a huge number of substances that we can't get except from plants because nothing but plants makes them. And it nourishes these guys, which protect us. They protect us from infections, and they protect us from chronic illness. Okay, James, what time is it?
Time would be 3:55 at the sound of the chime.
Okay, we started a little bit late, so let me ask for another question or two, if you have them. And then I'm going to wind this up with a sort of final all-inclusive thing.
We can always have another meeting. You can always tell us more.
Okay.
If I accept everything you say, and it all makes a lot of intuitive sense, those are good, those are bad, those are good. I think what stops people who want to do the right thing, and you kind of alluded to at the beginning of your talk, it takes time to change your palate. In other words, if you put ice cream on my tongue, it's going to say, thank you, thank you. If you put asparagus, it's going to go, stop. So somehow, I don't know how you change that. I'm not going to eat asparagus for a year and be cured. But do you have any solutions other than punish yourself? What's that? Fruits and vegetables.
What?
But none of the stuff in your whole grains, fruits and vegetables, legumes, especially legumes, and taste as near as good as an ice cream cone. I'm not being silly. What do we have today for, meatloaf, and we had hot dogs yesterday because people like that. So somehow you have to change your palate, your taste buds, and I have been unable to do that.
Okay, I think you're bringing up some very important points. First of all, not only we, but baboons and even gorillas who eat a mostly plant diet do occasionally kill and eat small animals. And I don't think that there's any question that all of us salivate when we smell meat grilling on a barbecue, and the chemicals it's producing are apparently actively really awful for you. I think myself, and this is absolutely purely personal opinion, that there has got to be some reason why we are so drawn to those kinds of foods. Now, people have suggested that we are drawn to creamy, fatty food because of two things. We, if we were lucky, nursed at our mother's breasts, and so we better have a built-in taste for milky, creamy stuff, and also that most of our human history has been major periods when we didn't have enough to eat. Famine was unfortunately a pretty normal feature of human existence. And when you're trying to recover from famine, then high protein, high fat, high sugar things are important. So those are built into us. So I think it's important that none of us, I don't want anybody to meet me and go, oh, I better hide because I haven't turned vegan yet. Because I think all of us have built-in drives to eat certain foods because given our ancestral conditions, it was important to be driven in that direction. However, I will say this. I went to what is these days being called a whole food or whole plant diet to distinguish it from an Oreo and potato chip vegan diet, which strictly speaking is vegan, but sure ain't good for you, at the end of January. And I can tell you some good things. I can tell you, first of all, that there are a whole bunch of studies showing that people who eat nuts not only live longer than, that seems to be like, if you eat nuts, you're way out there on the longevity scale, but also that you can add nuts to people's diet without taking away any other food, and they'll still lose weight. Those were such weird findings that they kept doing more studies to make sure that, there wasn't something wrong with the other ones. I thought, really? So I started eating nuts. In fact, Virginia sold me a bunch. And I can tell you it's true. I now weigh about 5 pounds less than when I started. I have not been hungry since I started. I've always eaten a low salt diet because my mother did, because her mother did. And I thought, well, okay, I'm not going to lose my taste for salt because I don't have very much taste for salt. But I found that in the last month or so, I have forgotten that, yeah, a couple little sprinkle of salt would taste good, tastes fine to me. So I have adjusted. I happen to like vegetables, and I'm a good cook. Sorry to brag, but I think I am a good cook. And my food sensitivities, which were huge, I mean, at one point they were close to life-threatening. That's why I lost all this weight. I used to be overweight. So I know what it is to go on diets and so on. My food sensitivities have abated considerably. Does that mean that I won't salivate when I smell meat grilling on the barbecue? Probably not. I think that there is probably some evolutionary reason why we react that way. But what I can tell you is that I enjoy this diet much better than I thought I was going to. And maybe more surprising, I decided that I was going to give myself a once-a-week treat and have 2 grilled cheese sandwiches on the Sabbath. And I've been doing that. And what I was afraid of was that come Sunday, not my Sabbath, when I went back to eating my tempeh and sauerkraut sandwich, that I was going to be going, oh, I want my grilled cheese. Actually, the opposite is happening. I'm still eating my grilled cheese sandwich, I'm still enjoying it, but not nearly as much as I thought I was going to. So all I can tell you is I feel a lot better, and people who have adopted this diet find that within a very short period of time, really major markers of health, like triglycerides, LDL cholesterol, total cholesterol, blood sugar, go down. And that most illnesses, most heart disease can be reversed on this kind of diet. Dean Ornish is getting Medicare reimbursement for his patients. He's now taking on prostate cancer patients because they can be reversed too. And for those of us like me who are the most terrified of Alzheimer's dementia, we know at this point that Alzheimer's disease can almost certainly be prevented by this kind of diet. And people are beginning to reverse not only mild cognitive decline, but early stage Alzheimer's. This is relatively new, but it's happening. So this change can be a life-saving or life and hope giving change for a lot of people for whom conventional medicine can do nothing. Because all of the diseases that I've mentioned are diseases that can be managed, but they can't really be helped with conventional medicine. Now, my final piece of this is this. There are 4 reasons, all converging on this kind of diet, and I think it's really important to know this. One of them is health, which is what I've talked about. One of them is hunger, world hunger. One of them is animals. And last in order, but the most important, is climate. We know at this point that the climate crisis really is a crisis. It's not just a problem anymore. Depending on how you figure it, and there are a lot of ways to figure it, probably half of greenhouse gases, more in some estimations, less in others, are produced by the kind of agriculture that we are engaging in, which is mostly going to the feeding of animals that we eat. And the United Nations has issued a report saying that one of the first of all, they're saying raising animals for food is not sustainable. We can't do it. There isn't the land, there isn't the food supply. Most of the soybeans in the United States go for feeding animals. And it takes 9 pounds of plant protein to produce 1 pound of animal protein. So you can think of the waste. That feeds right into the hunger issue. You could be feeding a lot of people. It takes about a ton of water to produce that pound of animal protein. We have a serious water problem, and it's getting worse. So the United Nations has actually said the most important thing we can do is to stop the kind of agriculture we are engaging in. We're about 80% of all of the water, all of the inputs that are driving climate change. All of that, most of it, is going for raising animals that we then eat. So it's probably the single biggest driver of climate change. So one of the things that makes me happy, and I know it's just me, but at least I'm not contributing the way I was. I don't even want to go into the yucky stuff that I've learned about raising animals in the United States for food. We do a particularly horrible job of it. Confined animal feedlot operations, or CAFOs as they're called, they're unbelievably cruel to the animals. The USDA, in its wisdom, decided about 30 years ago that they were short on personnel, so they were going to stop doing meat inspection. They were going to let slaughterhouses inspect themselves, and they're still doing that now. And you wouldn't believe the conditions. We all like animals here, and I don't think we like only cats and dogs and birds. We don't want to inflict the kind of cruelty that we are in fact inflicting. And I think most of us know that the Quakers, back when there was slavery, stopped eating sugar because sugar was raised by slaves. It was raised by slaves because it was a hell of a way to work. And if you're like me, we admire those people. But if we're eating animals, we are contributing in a major way to the suffering of literally millions of sentient beings. We would have way more food and way more water available if we weren't using it all to feed animals, which we then eat. And we would be healthier. So it seems to me that when we've got, this kind of convergence, things are pretty clear. Now, what you said about exercise and many other things is absolutely true. For those of us who are dependent on someone else to prepare food, what can we do? Well, first of all, we can look at what's right. We do have access to fresh vegetables in the form of salad and fresh fruit, and that's a good thing. We have fruit sales here, and those are good. They're not organic, but that's a heck of a lot better than not having them at all. They're good. Thanks to Carol, she and I had a discussion a while back, we do have vegetarian options some of the time, and taking advantage of that is fantastic. We need more. There's a lot more that we need to do, but there is already some stuff that's right, and I understand that plans are afoot to revive some help for Sue Jerry, who is trying to cope on her own with staffing problems and budget problems and so on, and steer things in the right direction. In addition to that, as you can guess, I have so much more to tell you about specific illnesses that can be managed by tweaking your diet, that if you want me to do a follow-up talk, or God willing, and I have the energy, do a cooking demonstration in the activities building, I'd be happy to do anything as a follow-up. Sarah?
I think, is it working? Many of us can identify with what James said about we're in one habit, and it seems really daunting to change over to a radical thing. But you told me something about if you eat one serving of green.
Oh, yes, yes.
I thought that was really helpful. That was something I can do.
Yes, okay, thank you very much. All right, one of the things that's really helpful about looking at the summaries that Dr. Greger provides is that in many cases, if all you do is add one additional serving of fruit per week, or one additional helping of vegetables per week to what you're getting now, you get a significant drop. Again, this is looking at a whole population. This doesn't mean you personally. You might not get those results, right? But over a whole population, you can see something like cancer risk will drop 13% if you have one more serving of fruit per week. Wow, as Sarah said, I can do that. Right? So this is not an all or nothing thing. Thank you so much. If you just start moving a little bit in that direction, you will actually be making a difference, not only to yourself, but to all the other stuff I've talked about. Yes, super important.
Another thing is giving yourself time. So when I was young, in the 70s, my family moved to upstate New York, and I opened a health food store, and we grew all our food. So my husband initially did not feel he was eating dinner if there was not some form of meat or animal protein on his plate. So it took time. You know, if you get in the habit, when you go shopping for your food, do not go down the middle parts of the supermarket. That's where all the processed food is. So if you just make a perimeter ring, you'll have a better chance of not having food in your house. So when you get the craving, it's not there for you to eat. It's painful, yes, sometimes it's painful, and there's ways to reward yourself, like people had said, have nuts, but don't have a bag of dry beef jerky there. You know, that's like probably one of the lowest level of snacks that you can eat. So,
And exercise, to me, can shift that craving.
yeah.
Right?
So make sure when you buy your food, you're at least buying the green so that when you're feeling positive and want to help your body, there's something there that's good for you to eat.
Well, also, what I have found out is that a lot of the people who transitioned to this diet were in very bad health, and they were in very bad health because they were really hooked on junk food. And some of them have been remarkably good at coming up with substitutes that taste good. I made a mushroom stroganoff that was so good that I've made it again and frozen a lot of it. And it's all plant-based, and it's absolutely delicious. So there is a cuisine there that, skeptical though I was, produces really good-tasting dishes that mimic a lot of the stuff that you like. It isn't just, when I became vegetarian a long time ago, I thought I was eating, there's meat, and then there's vegetable, and then there's a starch, and that's dinner. And when you take away the meat, what have you got? Well, after a while, you can't even remember eating that way, but there is a transition. So, that's part of the reason I have all those cookbooks there. I told Marcia in the library, she has copies of all three of the How Not to Die, How Not to Diet, How Not to Age, but I also told her then I would be happy to give at least some of the other books on long-term loan to the library so that people can take them out. So if you're at all interested, I will be happy to make those available to you. Yes, there's somebody back there, and I can't quite see who it is.
The important thing is to remember, though, vegetarian is not vegan. Vegetarian still can have can have dairy, it can have eggs, it can have all those things. But if you're truly vegan, you're not doing those kind of foods. And we don't have that option here.
That's right. And I think that, you know, I mean, that's why I'm grateful to Carol for providing at least some vegetarian options some of the time. That's why I think it'll be good to have a food committee that can help Sue Jerry, who I think is, you know, doing a very hard job and doesn't, you know, and could use some help. And I think there are other things that you can do. Exercising is for sure one of them. Staying hydrated is really important. I can now tell you in detail why, but I won't. I've talked long enough. I think for those of us who cannot cook for ourselves, we do need to have some gentle pushing in the right direction for the food service. And I'll be glad to help in any way I can. Thank you very much.
Thank you.